Well, the Prime Minister says the government will be straight back to work. The biggest question is whether it has a mandate to do exactly that and what it has a mandate not to do. Anyway, you'll see Albo appear very shortly, probably in a window on our screen. Just he's out getting an ice cream, it seems, a gelati in his old favourite coffee shop in Leichhardt, his electorate. Anyway, if you spot that, you'll see what's going on there. Anyway, we always want to see how it can change business conditions and encourage investment and also to boost economic growth that we were talking about earlier. So joining me to work through all of that are the leaders of two of Australia's key business groups. Andrew McKellar, Chief Executive of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Innes Willox, the Chief Executive of the Australian Industry Group. Innes, can I start with you here? It's quite clear right now that many Australian businesses believe they are not competitive as compared with overseas. Productivity has declined. Our standards of living broadly have also really faltered. So from that point of view, there is work for this government to be done. Have they got a mandate to try and improve many of the things that business now are telling them make them uncompetitive?
Well, morning, Ross. Look, the point here is that the issues that were front and centre for Australian business and the Australian economy on Saturday morning are still with us on Sunday morning. This election result hasn't magicked away the problems and challenges and issues that Australia face as we try and struggle to become more prosperous and to do better for ourselves. So the government has immense challenges ahead. They were elected very clearly and they deserve congratulations for that election. But now the hard work begins. It was pleasing to hear the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, this morning talk about putting productivity first. So let's put that to the test over the next 3 years. Let's see if the government is as good as its word. There are huge challenges when it comes to productivity, and productivity growth means prosperity. So we have policy settings at the moment which are inimical to productivity, the industrial relations settings, the unreliability and cost of energy, the regulation that is strangling business at the moment. We're in an economy, Ross, where 151,000 businesses went out of business last year. The one thing that has been the main issue for our members calling us over the past year is, unfortunately, redundancy. We are seeing 4 in 5 jobs being created either in the public service or in the public sector. So the business community, private enterprise, is really struggling at the moment. The government now has won an election, but now has a huge task to turn things around when you've got big sectors of the economy: construction, retail, manufacturing, hospitality sector, all in recession or close to it. So the government now really has to get to work and has to really rethink, we believe, how they do make Australia productive and competitive and innovative again.
So, Andrew, I want to bring you in here and just ask, what does the government do? Because quite clearly it's laid out its election promises and its vows. The point is whether it now has to do more beyond that, what it's promised in housing, what it's promised in education and training with more TAFE places and locking in free TAFE. All of these types of things, are they enough to actually turn the business environment around from these record numbers of businesses going broke in Australia as we speak?
Well, Ross, I think the first thing I want to do, and that is to start by saying it is congratulations to Anthony Albanese and his team on their re-election last night. And I think they've got a good result there. I think they can take a day to reflect on the achievement that they've made. And I think we can all reflect on the fact that we have a strong democratic system in Australia. That's important to business. It's important that we see an outcome like we did last night. There is a smooth process in place, and I think a very respectful process by the major parties in terms of the outcome. So that's a great strength that Australia has, and I think it's an important one to acknowledge first up. But look, we've had a 5-week campaign now behind us. There's been an extensive range of commitments that the government has made during that process, and shortly we'll be getting the credit card bill. But look, there are a number of areas that we would say they will have to focus on. One big one, and it's been alluded to a number of times in the comments already this morning, the global economic and geopolitical environment, that is a significant area of concentration challenge. It's where a lot of focus is going to have to be in the period ahead. I think business and government have been working in a very coordinated way, in a very close way, through the election campaign period on ensuring that we do have the right approach on that, and you cannot fault the government on the way they've approached that to this point. So obviously in the weeks and months ahead, the next steps will be taken on that, and ultimately there will be leader-to-leader meetings, but that's an area where I think business will be working very closely with government to ensure that we're able to address those economic risks. The other areas behind that, yes, there are significant commitments that the government's foreshadowed, but obviously the issues around red tape, compliance burden, that's a key part of the productivity agenda going forward. Business will want to see a way to address that with government. We want to work constructively with government in that space. We are concerned that some of the things that were said during the election campaign potentially add on to that burden. So that's something that business will want to talk to government about. The whole energy agenda as well. We've got to try and get, I think, a sustainable, affordable, and ambitious but realistic pathway on that.
Yes.
So I think that's something as well that we'll want to work very closely with government on.
I want to bring Ines back in here and just ask one simple question there, and that is if you consider where the government sits today. I mean, it's been a situation where I guess the first term of this government was not particularly ambitious when it came to tax reform. It was not necessarily, it got a lot of stuff through, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't necessarily ambitious in the way, say, that a Hawke Keating government we would remember having been ambitious. My question is whether Anthony Albanese, having won so comprehensively now, can afford politically to be a more emboldened politician than maybe he has been in this first term.
Well, it was a cautious first-term government, and I think they've been rewarded for that caution. Obviously, there are some areas where there are differences and where business would have hoped the government would have done more and could have done more. But it was a cautious first-term government. Now that the government has been re-elected so emphatically, you would hope that they would take a more positive approach towards productivity-enhancing reform, reform that does build a stronger economy for what are pretty volatile times. One of the issues, of course, is we have to resolve the trade scenario with the Trump administration, both directly with the Trump administration, but also the knock-on effects with our trading partners in the region. So we want to see the government work to stabilise that as quickly as possible. That's a key one. You talked about tax. Look, the tax reform agenda was pretty minor in the end. It amounts to $5 a week. That's not going to change the dial when it comes to making Australia more competitive or Australians, clearly much more prosperous and able to have more money in their own pockets. We would hope that the government will be able to sit down and work through and talk with business and others across the parliament around how do we rework the Australian tax system, take it to the next election to make us more competitive, to make us in a position where Australians are able to pocket more of their own money and to be rewarded for hard work. That's what we want to see, and to make things easy for business. The point now, Ross, is that we are running at a 30% tax to GDP ratio. That's not sustainable over the longer term. We need to look at our tax mix and our approach to tax and have a serious conversation and make some serious decisions about it. What we've done in the past is not going to work in the future. The world is changing around us very quickly, and we have to be able to adapt quickly.
Indeed. And Andrew, I just want to bring you in here because this does go to Australia's global competitiveness, and the members that you represent, they want to get on, but they want to also make certain that there's a reason for them to invest and that they can get a reasonable return on those assets. That's one of the keys here. This is about competitiveness, and there's not a national conversation really about competitiveness, and it's a matter of where Australia is competitive right now as well.
Look, that's absolutely right. So, I mean, we do want to see the government develop an ambitious agenda. We want to see that productivity and competitiveness are things that government really is seeking to move the needle on. If you don't have an agenda for productivity, then you don't have an agenda for real wage growth, and that's just one of the fundamental realities. So. We know that they want to see better living standards. We know that they want to see things like real wages going up sustainably. If they're going to achieve those sorts of ambitions, then they do have to have that sort of agenda. So, look, we've had, as I say, a 5-week campaign. Throughout that campaign, I don't think the word productivity was mentioned, almost at all. Strangely enough, this morning I was listening to the interview with the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. I heard him mention it 3 or 4 times at least. So maybe that's a positive sign. And I think business really does want to see those sorts of issues getting onto the agenda in this next term of government. Yeah, we're going to find that out very, very shortly. To Andrew McKellar and to Innes Willox, Chief Executive of the Australian Industry Group and the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, many thanks for your time today.